Okay, let's get moving. So thank you to our network of executives across the Insight Ignite community for joining us here today for our third session of Rise and Ignite this calendar year. These Rise and Ignite sessions aim to distill the most important things that executives like yourselves need to know about an emerging tech topic, sourcing the perspectives of both top corporates and scale-ups to provide you with competitive insights on the things that we think you should know about. Today, we're going to be focusing in on responsible AI, which is a topic that I'm personally super interested in, very passionate about, and one that is also fast emerging as a board level issue. To set some premise to this conversation, it was until no more than a few years ago that the conversation of responsible AI was confined to academia, AI practitioners, and technology activists. However, data and AI has now taken a much more central role across the enterprise, which means much more real-world use cases being deployed, and therefore people who are being impacted by AI. The potential benefits of this, of course, are relatively well understood. Everything from opening untapped revenue opportunities, creating workflow efficiencies, and driving improved customer experience. But the adverse effects of algorithmic failure, when AI is not directed responsibly, can be deeply consequential and maybe to the detriment of both the areas of society that they're impacting and also to the enterprises that produce those negative effects. And so as a result of this, responsible AI has really shifted from being a fringe consideration for enterprise leaders to a serious one that's being prioritized by the board and the C-suite under the scrutiny of their customers, their regulators, governments, and shareholders. So at Insight Ignite, we think it's a good time to have this conversation. And to provide some perspective on this and to get moving in the first segment of this section, I'll be first welcoming up Krishnaram Kenthapadi, who is the chief scientist at Fiddler, a super exciting portfolio company of ours who's building into the responsible AI space. And after that, I'll be welcoming up a really strong panel of guests for a discussion on responsible AI before closing out nicely on the half past mark. So Krishnaram, I can see you have already joined me on screen, and I'll hand it over to you.
Hello all, welcome to Insight Ignite, and thank you all for joining today. I get a message that I'm unable to start video because the host has stopped it, but I'll kind of get going while this issue gets resolved. So I'm going to motivate why we need to think about responsible AI, and specifically why we need to think about model monitoring and explainability. All right, so let's look at today's state of AI. So we are seeing more and more deployment of AI into production, but often the AI and machine learning teams do not have full visibility into how their models are functioning. This ranges from lack of enough transparency, as we have seen in several high-profile cases, and then issues about the model degrading in performance over time, and the model developers or other stakeholders not being aware of these issues. And more importantly, as Ben alluded to, there could be issues with biases into the model, and that can have potential impact for the affected communities, the affected end users, and often without enough tools or without enough vetting of the models, both before deployment and after deployment, it may not be possible to even identify that such issues exist. And finally, from a regulatory standpoint, often, especially in highly regulated domains like financial services, healthcare, and human resources, there is often a need to ensure that the model is compliant with various regulations. So why is this happening? The reason is that most of the machine learning models are very opaque. Over the last several years, the models have become more complex and having a large number of parameters. Often there are no explanations of how the model is behaving, and even the model developers do not have a good understanding of how the model is having an impact on the end users, whether in terms of which features are important or their biases. And often there is, even when there is emphasis on vetting the models, the emphasis is often on during model validation before the models are deployed, but there are not enough emphasis or tools on monitoring the models once they are deployed. This affects several different personas, ranging from business users, to customer success executives, to auditors, regulators, data scientists, and so forth. And they all come with a few different angles about why these dimensions are important. So here are some quotes from some of the people who are seeing these problems. For example, there are often issues where the lack of monitoring and as a result, degradation in performance directly translates into lost revenue or profit or other opportunities. There are often concerns whether due to issues with the models, would someone have to go and testify before legislators in a parliament? And more importantly, there is a social responsibility dimension. When the machine learning models are becoming applied in a broad context, we want to make sure that they work well for all stakeholders, for all users who are being affected by the models. So this is where Fiddler steps in. Fiddler helps provide insights into the opaque underpinnings of the model. This Fiddler helps provide insights both during the offline stage of the model validation by providing explanations of which features are most important, as well as during the online stage by helping understand how the model is performing over time, helping monitor for data drift or concept drift or drift in the prediction distribution, drift in model performance, and so forth. And this is achieved by looking at all dimensions of the machine learning lifecycle. So this is what we refer to as model performance management, wherein we want to ensure during the offline stages in terms of ensuring that the data that is used for training the models is representative, is not it does not have any specific biases. And likewise, once the models are trained, to ensure that the models work well for all relevant stakeholders and there are no biases in the model. And similarly, like before the model is deployed, in terms of validating which segments have poor performance and so forth. Once the models are deployed, what we see is, or the stages on the right side, we help record the traffic and metadata and ensure that the models are retaining performance. We help provide alerts when there are drifts in the performance or when there are outliers, biases, and other kinds of issues. And more broadly, we help provide analysis to identify the root cause issues. When there are such drifts observed, why is that happening? And what specific actions can the model developer or other stakeholders take to reduce the effects of these issues and then help improve the performance of the model for all the stakeholders? So more broadly, we can think of model performance management as consisting of dimensions like monitoring, explainability, and bias or fairness. And the analogy I would like to draw is, just as the application performance management has revolutionized DevOps, we anticipate that model performance management would help revolutionize machine learning operations and also help achieve more efficiency and more better compliance and other benefits to the machine learning operations community. Here is a screenshot of how Fiddler provides this experience. We have a unified control pane which provides a summary view of all different projects and models across an organization. These could be used by legal or regulatory teams, as well as business users or IT or data teams. Then we help provide monitoring with different types of alerts, and also help provide explainability to understand which features are most important, and use that as part of highlighting which of the alerts are relevant and when should corrective actions be taken. In terms of the impact, here is an example from a large US bank, wherein they were able to improve the model performance and also reduce the time taken to identify issues. Often when the data scientists and machine learning engineers were doing this manually, the time taken would be significant. And by using tools like Fiddler, they're able to reduce the time taken to detect any issues. And as a result, that translates into a lesser lost opportunity and also a faster pace of iterating on machine learning models and improving the business metrics. So to summarize, Fiddler helps provide insights into how the models are performing, both before they're deployed and after they're deployed in production. And more broadly, this is a step towards helping build trust into how the AI models are performing. And we have been featured in several prominent forums, and we are partnering with organizations like AWS, Intel, NVIDIA, and Facebook. I'm looking forward to more further discussion with everyone in this panel.
Sorry, I've just noticed I'm muted. Brilliant. Thank you, Krishnaram. So we're going to jump into a panel discussion here with a number of different experts, included Krishnaram. So Christian, Manoj, and Diya, perhaps I'll welcome you all up and we can get the discussion underway. Wonderful. Why don't we start with just a quick round of introductions and then we can jump in. So Manoj, perhaps you'd like to kick us off.
Thanks again, Ben, for having me on. Manoj Saxena, I'm the chairman of a nonprofit called Responsible AI Institute. We focus on certification of AI systems, and I'm also a chairman of a venture-funded company called Cognitive Scale. And prior to this, I was the first general manager for IBM Watson.
That's wonderful. Diya?
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Diya Wynn, and I lead a team. I'm a senior practice manager at AWS in professional services. I lead a team with the express focus of partnering with our customers on their responsible AI journey. And that means that we look at what's necessary for them to be able to consider what sort of governance and structure they need to be in place, but also look at the things across people, process, and technology, ultimately to define what we would say is an operating model to best support their initiatives, as well as to ensure that we're minimizing impact, risk, and potential harm.
That's wonderful. And Christian?
Yeah, Christian Vogt. I'm with Cisco. Part of what I do is look at emerging technologies that come from the startup world, from innovative vendors that could be helpful for what we do at Cisco. We look at our existing processes, working closely with our business partners, look at what is working well, where are some challenges, and where could new technologies potentially help us. The area of AI in general and responsible AI in particular is, of course, one of the key topics here.
That's wonderful. So as you can see, we've got a number of different perspectives here that I think are needed to tackle a topic like this. So Manoj, I wanted to kind of start by taking a step back. Responsible AI as a term can be a little bit amorphous in terms of definition. How would you define responsible AI and why is it important?
Yeah. So I think I would take it in two steps. One is responsible AI is profitable AI. It's incredibly important for us to see it as something that's critical to the operations and actually adoption of AI by business. More specifically, responsible AI is the practice of designing, developing, and deploying AI systems in a manner that does three things. In a manner that, one, it empowers people in business. AI fairly impacts customers and society. And then also AI enables companies to trust and scale it with confidence. The absence of responsible AI, or I call it trust as a service, is going to hold back enterprise adoption of AI, much like the absence of security held back for a long time the adoption of internet by companies. So it's an incredibly important topic. And like you said, it's a topic that boards and regulators and customers and businesses, not just data scientists, all of them are increasingly getting concerned and focused on it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I totally agree. And so Krishnaram, I mean, you've been working in this space for the last several years. How have you seen this evolve over those years, and how do you expect the evolution to continue?
First of all, like I want to second what Manoj was alluding to. Like, yeah, so the parallel I was thinking of drawing is with the security and privacy domain. If we reflect back several years back, so often security was viewed as an afterthought, right? Once issues started emerging, like data breaches and other types of security issues, our companies started emphasizing security as by design. So likewise, I'm seeing a similar parallel with responsible AI, whether it is privacy or bias fairness or explainability, model monitoring, and so forth. There is a realization that these topics are very important. And instead of viewing these as afterthought, now organizations are taking a proactive step of looking into these dimensions while designing building models before deployment. As Manoj alluded to, in many domains, especially like high stakes domains, whether this high stakes in terms of the impact it has on the humans, or in high stakes in terms of the economic consequences, there is a desire to look into these dimensions beforehand. And if these dimensions are not taken care of, then chances are the machine learning models would not even get adoption, right? Just to give an example, if a doctor is not able to understand how the model is working and whether the model is retaining its performance, chances are that the doctor may not rely on the model, may decide to not leverage the insights provided by the model. So I think helping shed light into how the model is working, helping develop trust into the performance or how the model is behaving is very important for its adoption.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, you spoke about the kind of high stakes, high risk use cases. And I think, it's one thing to recognize that responsible AI is the right thing to do from an ethical point of view, where, the lives, well-being, health, etc. of broad or marginalized groups are at stake. I think there's the other side of it as well, which is, that there's a business case for responsible AI. As you mentioned, Manoj, responsible AI is profitable AI. So I wanted to pose a question to, the full group, actually. If you were building up a business case for responsible AI to pitch the CEO of a large corporate in Fortune 500, what are some of the points that you'd want to raise?
So I can take that a little bit, and this can be, I think the first thing is that AI is so instrumental to all parts of the business. AI will be woven into every business process and every end customer interaction. So I typically talk to the boards in terms of both an offense and a defense. On the positive side, using responsible AI will help you build customer trust and value in your brand, because customers know how you're using the data, how you're using AI models. It enhances inclusion and diversity on the positive side. On the negative side, it helps prevent lawsuits, it helps prevent regulatory fines, and it also helps limit revenue losses. So it's a very solid business case. And at Responsible AI Institute, we actually have modeled for our members potential cost as well as benefit of adopting responsible AI as a design practice.
Super interesting. I mean, perhaps Christian and Diya, you both obviously work for large corporate entities yourselves, AWS and Cisco. Do you have anything to add to that? What are some of the points you'd raise if building up?
Yeah, no, I think that Manoj really summarized it well, and it's a very similar conversation that we have, right? That it really starts off with the foundation of trust. We can't assume that people are going to do the right things for the right reasons, right? Because there are trade-offs that you have to consider in the way of, thinking about what income or revenue that they might be able to generate from a specific product or using, an individual service. But being able to create the case or show them that companies who organizations or people, consumers trust, actually outperform. And there was a study several years ago that said that, right? That organizations that were trusted outperformed by 300% companies that were not trusted. So the focus on developing a trust, from your consumers or your constituents, as well as sort of in the industry, positions an organization to be able to adopt AI in a greater way and at greater scale. And that has to be part of the discussion as we start to look at the other benefits, like Manoj mentioned, around really developing and building inclusive products. And one thing that I want to point out, and which is, I think, is valuable in this context, not necessarily an AI example, but when we go back to thinking about when they developed seatbelts, right? And those were designed for and tested, they were tested, specifically with male dummies, right? Average size and structure of a male. And then they found that the output, or that these actually caused harm to women and children, right? Because they weren't structured and developed in a way. This is sort of, a great example of like the lack of inclusion that comes from products. And so we want to actually, and then people didn't trust them and didn't want to use them, right? And so we have to work through the whole process of sort of regaining trust in the benefit of the technology, the seatbelt, and what it was going to offer. The same is true that we have to consider when we think about AI, and then the benefits we gain when we have the inclusive sort of development, of products. So I think that kind of gives us the structure for helping customers understand, or companies understand, the value and importance, and then the benefit to doing this.
Yeah, well said, Diya, and a great example as well, the example of the seatbelts, because it shows that in many cases, non-responsible use of AI is not intentional, right? It just happens. It's without any bad intentions. So I think the only thing I will add is that, like any technology, AI can be applied in a responsible way and create enormous benefits, and it can be applied in an irresponsible way and create tremendous harm. And AI just happens to be a technology that is incredibly powerful, where this leverage that can go either way, will make a huge difference, right? As we know, it can be used to unlock extra revenue, reduce cost, improve customer experience. But then the flip side can be true as well, depending on how it is deployed. And people will notice, and I think that should be part of every business case. At the end of the day, people will notice, whether it's the employees or your customers or even your investors, because AI is meant to operate at scale. So it will generate many data points that people will be able to look at, right? And if there is bias in what the model does, people will eventually figure that out. The fact that we are essentially delegating decision-making to a technology doesn't mean that the humans are not still responsible for those decisions that are being made. And to make sure that we as humans can stand behind those automatically made decisions, that ultimately is the intention of responsible AI and should be part of every business case.
That's super interesting. And I think even, access to talent as well, it's competitive, it's expensive. So training, retaining talent in the world where, those same talent pools are looking to work on more purposeful outcomes, it becomes a talent strategy as well. I think the one thing that I've seen working across a number of enterprises, it's a hard thing to do to convert from the principles of responsible AI into the practice. I think that's a real sticking point. How do you actually execute on responsible AI principles? So I'd love to get your perspectives on how you do that, what success metrics might look like when doing that. And feel free to jump in, whoever.
And maybe I'll start. I mean, it's very similar to using AI effectively. So using it effectively and using it responsibly, ultimately, it's way more than just the technology. There's a lot that you need to establish in terms of process capabilities, principles, and then of course, policies as well. We look at it as a journey that our business functions go through when they adopt AI. We call it the stakeholder journey, akin to the customer journey. And that goes way beyond just the deployment of AI. It starts really with the identification of opportunities, right? Where we look at what is working well, what is not working well, where can technology help us? including the prioritization of these opportunities, developing a credible point of view of what the return on investment might be, all costs included, to piloting these technologies, measuring their success in a very quantitative way, all the way to operationalizing those applications of AI that actually make sense, right? And then including the change management, including the communication. The process doesn't even stop there, because once you have deployed it, and Krishnaram mentioned that earlier, you need to keep an eye on it. You need to model it for data drift. You need to model it for performance drift going forward. So AI, at the end of the day, is more than just the technology. Is almost can be better thought of as a technology-enabled service that you provide to your company to help it scale. And looking at this end-to-end is what helps companies operationalize this. If you only look at the technology, if you only look at your pilots, that you are going to have a hard time bringing it to scale. And the same is true for responsible AI, simply because the points in the process where things can go wrong from a responsibility perspective can also happen all across that end-to-end process. From the very time where you look at data, right, to kind of when you have the models in operations and you watch out for drift.
Basically. Manoj, I think you're going to add something now.
I was going to say, it's a short statement. One of my pet peeves about AI and responsible AI is I believe as a tech community, we are designing AI from the wrong starting point. It needs to be designed human impact in, not data and models out. Since my days in Watson, the last 10 years, one thing I've kept saying to people is, there's nothing artificial about AI. This is all real stuff impacting real human beings, real opportunities. So my big thing would be is don't see this as a science and a technology problem. See it as a human impact and a business impact problem and work back from it, and don't work from data and models out.
Oh, Manoj, I love that, right? And it's somewhat core to the way in which we think about things at AWS, talking about customer first, right? Like who is impacted and consuming, then working our way backwards to then consider, how do we approach the problem and solve it? But I think that the points that Christian was making as well, in terms of like operationally, the structure we have to put in place is absolutely necessary. And this notion that we're not just looking at technology, because I think that's a big miss, where people just go and say, well, what tool can I use to measure or detect fairness? Or what do I need to put in place so that I have explainability? Instead of looking at this holistically and saying there are people, process, technology that all needs to work in concert so that we make sure that we're building, deploying, developing, and then using and iterating in a way that's responsible.
I just want to emphasize that often there is a tendency to think of responsible AI and say business goals as in conflict. That is usually not the case, right? Like in the process of improving fairness, or in the process of monitoring the models and so forth, that often translates into improvement to the short-term as well as long-term business goals. I think that's something I would emphasize to all the leaders who are watching this presentation.
That's a wonderful place to finish, and that's all we have time for. So that's an espresso hit of a panel discussion from some real leaders in the space. Diya, Manoj, Christian, and Krishnaram, thank you so much. If you're going to leave folks in the audience with one final thought to take away for the rest of the day, what would that be?
I guess for me, I would say that we all have a responsibility, in this sort of responsible AI journey, and taking a part in, ensuring that there are we're mitigating unintended impact, because it's mostly unintended, and actually doing the things necessary to build inclusively, as well as, meet business objectives and maximize our use of the technology.
If I were to add, I would say that loop in all the relevant stakeholders throughout the process, during the design, development, and deployment. And view responsible AI as something by design, right? Rather than viewing that as an afterthought.
Yeah, I would just reiterate a point that Krishnaram was actually making earlier, which is that responsible AI is not optional. It just has to be part of your process. You either do AI and you do it responsibly, or you better don't do it at all, because not doing it responsibly, or even risking of not doing it responsibly, might cause more harm than benefit.
I would say that we are at the start of a whole new generation of capabilities. I call these cyber trust, just like we have cyber security. So cyber risk is going to be made up of cyber trust and cyber security together. And we are at the very beginning of cyber trust as a space, just like cyber security was a space 25 years ago.
That's brilliant. And thank you all once more. For anyone for the folks still in the audience, I know people are starting to dial out for their next meeting. We have a report coming out on this exact topic with insights from across the folks on this panel right now included in that. So stay tuned, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.